Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We're kind of kicking off the summer here with a class on pollinator plants. So this is one of my favorite topics. We're just going to take a second here and stall while people start getting logged in. For those of you who are logging in early, we are expecting a large group today. So I'll just reiterate, I know I always say this, but just in case we have new people, just be aware if we're not able to get to everyone's questions today, you're always welcome to follow up with us after class. We're happy to take your questions at the store. You can email us and I'll help you follow up with Peg or another member of our team. We are also recording today. Alrighty, I'll go ahead and get us started. Well, all right, officially to anybody who is new, welcome to our webinar. To anybody who has attended before, welcome back. We're happy to have you. Peg Beer is with us today to talk about pollinator gardens, which is always a fun topic and a very popular one, which hence the big crowd today. Peg works out of our Fair Oaks store primarily. So she works in our annuals perennials department, putting together a lot of beautiful containers. She has a lot of experience drawing from her own garden. And I know is one of our primary instructors. So I know most of you are familiar with her. Just for everybody who's just getting on the call now, we are recording today's call. This is a Zoom webinar, so it's a little bit different than a meeting. When you have questions, you will hit that Q&A button on your Zoom menu, type those in, and Peg will be taking questions at the end of the class. If you have any questions during the class or any issues, feel free to send me a chat. Let me know and I can try to assist you. And we will be sending out, I have a very nice handout from Peg naming the plants that she's discussing. So I'll try and send those out in the chat like I usually do. And then we'll follow up with an email tomorrow with the full list of these plants and notes. So that's all for me. Peg, thank you as always for joining us.
And thank you, Sally, and thank you all for joining us also. This is an exciting topic for me. I love, number one, the plants, and they're beautiful, but I love the fact that they are taking care of our pollinators. And I'm very pleased that so many people now are in line with doing this kind of thing. Now, I think it was advertised pretty much that I'd talk about trees and shrubs and annuals and perennials. But what I'm really concentrating on today is pretty much the annuals and the perennials that bring the pollinators to the garden and that furnish the nesting, whether it's birds or whatever, and the pollen for them to keep them safe and for us to enjoy too. But I would like to start with one shrub anyway, because it mixes so well with the annuals and the perennials. I absolutely love this one. Of course, it's just a small one. It gets about 3 feet tall and certainly as wide. And it's a spirea. This particular one is Magic Carpet, but there's several out there and there's several bronzy ones out there. And they blend well, but they mix so well with the perennials. Okay. So primarily, I have a few pictures that I show you, and they are pretty much from my own garden because that's where I've gardened for all these years, for many, many years. And I do and have always gardened for the birds, bees, and butterflies. And I have the large trees because I've got a large property. People in a townhouse situation or only have a deck can't do that. But there are beautiful understory or smaller trees like the dogwood and the fringe tree, and so many that are native plants, even. And I don't go just for natives because I have a lot of beautiful things that are good pollinator plants or plants that they nest in or that are safe for them. There's lots of reasons to have different plants and to have diversity as much as you can. Now, if you've got a townhouse garden, you don't want one of everything, but you can certainly have a good bit if you plan in that direction. But let's bring up the first slide and talk to them again. For those of you who have joined us on these Zooms or in know that I push this thing of children in the garden. And this is little Clara, who's 5.5 now, and she's my great granddaughter, okay? And she is my little shadow. So we are on an adventure. We're going through the garden to see what is in bloom. And of course, in front of us is one of the beds that has a lot of pollinator plants in it. It has a lot of shrubs, but a lot of perennials also. It gets probably 6 hours of sun per day. And so I can grow most anything that I want to, even some shade things, because it has some slight protection from the hottest afternoon sun. And you can see that in that area, I do have the tall oaks because I have the space for them, but I have other smaller trees also. So let's go on a walk through the garden and see what's going on. And the next slide is actually containers, and the containers are above a retaining wall and are in front of my front porch that I love to sit in the rocking chair periodically. And yes, I do sit down in the garden. I try to enjoy and, yes, try to smell roses. But I change up this garden, and right now it doesn't look like this was taken last year. But right now, all of this is beginning, and I will also put a hummingbird feeder up within the next week because hummingbirds usually show up when the azaleas come into bloom. But the last couple of years, they've been just a little bit later than that. But these are containers. And so you can have a garden primarily in containers if your area is small. Or containers can be a part of a small in the ground garden, as in a townhouse perhaps. Or they can be within a big garden, as mine are. But these are here primarily to take care of the hummingbirds, but also the pollinators, but where I can see and enjoy them. And what's in those containers? You can see something that's in really heavy bloom. And that's a very interesting plant. And I should have brought that plant up with me actually, because it's really an interesting euphorbia. It's called Ascot Rainbow, and it's in full bloom now. And it lasts for a very long time. When it's finished, you cut back that stalk, and the foliage is beautiful. There are also a lot of salvia. There are perennial salvia, there are annual salvia, and they are all fantastic. What you're seeing here is primarily a new series. It's the Rockin' series, and it's not supposed to be necessarily perennial. It's in the annual section, but we had a fairly mild winter, and every one of them wintered over, and I'm just delighted. There's also lantana there. There's a number of other delightful things. I love the lantana. I love the salvia. Those are the prime ones. Fuchsia Gartenmeister, which I don't know that I brought up. I didn't. I forgot to bring the Fuchsia Gartenmeister up. But if we go to the next one, it's a closer picture of some of this Salvia Rockin' series that you will find in the annual section. And it comes in purple and blue and red, and I cannot praise it enough. And my, do the hummingbirds ever love it. And this is one of them. This particular one is a deep purple, but it's beautiful. Now it's going to get bigger than this. It gets 2.5, maybe more feet tall. But when it has finished blooming in each area, if you cut it back, just that back to the leaf structure, it will continue to bloom all summer long. Now, also, there are different types of this. And this particular one is also a rockin', but it's called Rockin' Playing the Blues. But isn't that interesting? And it too will bloom all summer. Every now and then, as I said, when this bloom is finished, cut it back to the next set of blooms, and it'll just keep going and be very tidy also. There are perennial salvias, and very similar to this, although this particular one is Napita, and it will have a long period of bloom, Napita or salvia, and they look very similar. This particular one is the cat's pajamas. Okay, isn't that a cute name? And it stays fairly small. Some of them are much taller than this, but this one stays fairly low and it's lovely. This is Nepeta, but you can also say the salvia, perennial salvias are very similar, and they will have a period of bloom, and it's a long period, and then you can just shear it back and it will bloom again. Oftentimes you'll get a third set of blooms. Very, very similar to that plant and also to the salvias are the agastache. Agastache. And this is just one variety, but there are a number of varieties. And they will get taller, okay? This particular one will certainly reach 2 feet. Some of them will be 2.5 feet, but they're beautiful. You can see again, if when this is finished and you snip it back to here, you've got all these little buds waiting to come in and take its place. And so they are wonderful, wonderful plants for pollination too. Let's go back to the pictures, okay? This next picture actually is an area that I planted next to a retention pond, and it gets a lot of sunshine. I have a lot of shade, and so I have to pick my areas where I get at least 6 hours of sun. And please, when you look at a plant and it says full sun, know that it will perform pretty well, okay, acceptably well if it gets 6 hours of full sun. Okay. Now, where things that like shade are concerned, you want to have some protection. They'll take all the sun or dappled light, but they don't like the hottest afternoon sun. And if you have a deck or a really hot backyard, that's not the place for a plant that likes shade, okay? But in this area, it gets probably 7 hours of full sun through the day, and it's a steep bank. And I didn't want anybody mowing that bank. And so this is just slightly off my property, and I got permission to plant it up for the birds, bees, and butterflies. And all the plants really through the season, because there's diversity here. There's enough repetition, and it's a big space, okay? So if you don't have a big space, you're going to have to pick and choose what you really like, okay? But the yellow is actually seedlings of Rudbeckia, but it's not totally perennial, and it's often called Gloriosa daisy. And it's really beautiful, blooms again all season long. And these are actually seedlings from that. So I've got a lot of variation going on. And in the centers, the cone has wonderful seeds in it. And oh my, the birds love that. In the center, you'll see a rather tall plant. It's a cosmos. And I love to buy just a few of those that are already started and then throw in some extra seeds that'll come along a little later. But they too bloom all summer if you deadhead. Behind that cosmos is a butterfly bush. Now, I know some people don't like butterfly bush, but oh boy, do the birds, bees, and butterflies like it, you know? And some of them don't seed about very bad, very much. So I don't worry about. I don't really have a problem with these. Okay, it's really a great plant for the birds, bees, and butterflies. And there's a lot going on beyond that also, but let's look at the next picture. Okay. Echinacea. Echinacea is another one that is very appealing, and it furnishes a lot of seed for the birds. The goldfinches really love this plant, and I have a lot of it. The pink one and the native one really do drop their seeds, and they're not a problem because they're easy to pull up. Anything that seeds about doesn't bother me as long as in fact, I like it. As long as it's easy to pull up. Some things are not, and I'll name a few of those. In front of that is a very pleasant grass. It's Pennisetum Carly Rose, and it has never seeded itself about. I don't like the grasses that seed themselves about. Now, I have to say, I have a love-hate relationship with Chesmanthium, which loves part shade, and it is native, but it is terrible. Unless you really love it, you don't want to plant Chesmanthium, okay? But that particular grass is very nice, okay? Here's a little closer picture of that Rudbeckia. It's Rudbeckia hirta. That it means it's not completely perennial, but often comes back. And there is behind that some interesting plants, really. And I don't think I brought the Bernariensis up, but there were zinnias, and there was a lot of, again, other plants that are really geared for the birds, particularly. Now, here is a plant that I want to tell you seeds itself, and you really got to love it because it has a taproot and it's difficult to remove. And that's bronze fennel, and it's very tasty. The children, the grandchildren, the great grandchildren all love to munch on this when they're out in the garden. And it has a beautiful flower. It is,
Hey, can anybody hear that and let me know?
but pardon?
Okay, I'm wondering, my sound is cutting out, Peg. I'm sorry, and I couldn't tell if it was you or me. I think it might be me. So
What
just,
what's cutting out, honey?
it's my sound, but it's my internet connection that's unstable. So I'm just warning you, if I disappear, just carry on. I know Kelly's with you.
Okay, yes, she is here, and I don't see.
Okay, okay, we have some people saying they're not having issues. So it is me. So I'm just warning you, if I disappear, Kelly can access the chat and everything. So you guys are good, but hopefully I will be fine from here.
Okay, we'll be.
Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. So anyway, the taller thing that you see here is bronze fennel. And the birds absolutely love the seeds, but they do drop about. And when they do, you want to get them while they're really young because they're difficult to get up otherwise. But I highly recommend it because it's just a delightful plant. It's tall. It does get 3.5 to 4 feet tall easily. The yellow that you see is yarrow. And I enjoy this plant also. It's very hardy. It's 2.5 to 3 feet tall. And I love to pick it when it's in its prime to dry because it makes a great dried flower that lasts. I've had some last 3 years perhaps in an arrangement, okay? And then you see more of the pink echinacea, and that's fantastic. Now you're seeing something that we once upon a time carried here. I don't think I've seen it lately, and that's Queen Anne's lace. And I absolutely love that plant. And you can keep it blooming for a long time if you deadhead. And deadheading is a good idea because it does drop seeds. And like the fennel, it's a tap root and it's more difficult to get out. So you want to catch it when it's young if you really want these things. And if you really want it, you may have to stop by the roadside and pick some, and the seeds are very viable. In the next one, okay, we hear a lot about the monarch and the plants that they lay their caterpillars on, okay? And this is my absolute favorite here. It's Asclepias. but there are a lot of taller ones, and they have a tendency for me to run around, and sometimes they run into areas that I don't want them in, and they're not really easy to get up either. But this is Asclepias tuberosa, and that's important. It's low growing, 2.5 feet tall, and each plant can be certainly 2 feet wide. Blooms for a long period of time, and after it finishes its bloom, it forms its seed pod. And when it opens up, it's just fun to blow those silky little seeds around, and the grandchildren love to do that. Okay. But pictured with it is a combo that I enjoy tremendously. I love the orange, but I love the contrast of the deep lavender of the lavender. Okay. Lavender can be a little tricky to grow. It loves to have really good drainage, a lot of sunshine, and doesn't want to be surrounded by other plants that it can't get good air circulation. And I have that because it's growing at the top of this bank. And I incorporated small, sharp gravel into the clay that was there because, let's face it, it was a dam for that particular retention pond, and it was solid clay. And so I really did add a lot of sand, coarse sand, and some small stones. And I have had this thriving for many years. When it finishes this full heavy bloom, I will shear that plant. I'll grab a handful of it and cut it with my clippers, and it will just fill in nicely and come back into bloom in the fall. And it dries beautifully. One of my granddaughters particularly loved to braid it and do wonderful things with it. And in front of that, which is a nice contrast of color, not just in the foliage, but in the blossom also, is Santolina. And Santolina is about 2 feet tall, maybe could be 2.5 feet, but mostly 2 feet. And what a beautiful contrast that is. So, if you've got a small garden, this is a fun kind of thing to do. You can do nice complementary combinations in small spaces. Alrighty, there is a beautiful butterfly, and don't be asking me which one of these butterflies is which, because I probably might not get it right. Okay. I do love to watch them, but I'm not necessarily knowledgeable enough to quote exactly which butterfly it is. But on a zinnia, they love zinnias. Makes a great cut flower to bring into the house also. And if you deadhead, will keep going forever and ever. And look at this beautiful butterfly taken on an echinacea. They love these plants. And bee balm. It truly is. That's why it's called bee balm. Monarda. Monarda is the proper name. Just be aware that once it's established, its clump gets bigger and it wanders a little bit. Okay. It's just a beautiful plant. And every now and then you just have to restrict it somewhat if you have a restricted space. If you've got a lot of room, this is a great plant. Otherwise, keep it under control. There is another issue with some of the varieties that it can get a little mildew sometimes, but I've never had a major problem with that. And so I love my Monarda. I'm just cautious as to where I plant it. Now, here is an absolute favorite plant. I love summer phlox, Phlox paniculata. This one is a relatively new variety, and it's Phlox Gena, Jeana. And it blooms off and on all summer long and doesn't get mildew as a few of the other taller phlox do. It's worth growing some of the other phlox because they're very different. The flower heads are much larger and they're absolutely beautiful. But some of them will get some mildew every now and then, and I usually just let it play out. Let's come back to me for just a moment. We we all are interested in native plants, and one of our suppliers, one of the people that we buy a lot of perennials from, put together a neat book. Unfortunately, it's not available for people. They gave some of these to us, but it's what's native, and I wonder, two or three wonderful people actually put this together, so they're very knowledgeable. And I love what it has to say about phlox Gina. Gina was named after Gina Pruitt of Nashville, Tennessee, who found it growing mildew-free among a field of mildew-covered wild plants. Sweetly scented, lavender pink flowers bloom in midsummer through early autumn. The clean green foliage sets off the flower clusters on multi-stemmed branches, grows 2 to 4 feet in height, spreads 2 to 3 feet. This cultivar has sterile flowers, so no reseeding or reverting is not a problem. I love the way they describe some of these plants, but I just wanted to push the fact that Gina is a delightful plant. Okay. Yes, we need to go through these, I guess, a little bit faster, huh, Kelly? Okay, there is that Napita cat's pajamas. This is in one of the display gardens out in the front here in Fair Oaks, and we really are working on those display gardens to sort of bring them back to what they once were and need to be, okay? There's always maintenance. So if you walk through and you see a few weeds, that's an issue because maintenance has to be done, okay? And in the next picture, I do want to say that this is a gathering of herbs just outside my kitchen door where I have sunshine, and they are in containers because it's easy for me to walk out the door and snip those plants, whether it be parsley or thyme, oregano. I've got quite a few there. Let me tell you, well, all of them really, but particularly the basil. If you let some of it go to bloom, wow, is it ever a pollinator plant? But all the time is also, and the sage, the edible sage, is in bloom right now in the little garden here that we have, a little vegetable garden here at Fair Oaks. I love to combine the marigolds with this. I love to combine the nasturtiums with this because they're both edible flowers. I don't eat the marigolds because I don't like the flavor, but I do decorate with them. And the nasturtiums are totally edible and quite good. So think of your herb garden as also a pollinator garden. And there we go, parsley. Parsley is a favorite of the swallowtail. And you want to plant extra parsley so that you're not disappointed when all your parsley disappears. And here is again an absolute favorite. It's lantana and blooms all summer. Here again, you need to do a little bit of deadheading and look at the monarchs there. Now, Kelly, who's helping me today, was very instrumental in helping to set up our caterpillars last summer, and it was a wonderful experience. And that this is some of those that was inside that, right, Kelly? So let's go to the next picture. Oh, this is my great granddaughter again, among a lot of other children, because you announced that there was a release. It was a specific time for the release, and there were a lot. There was a large enclosed area, and there were a lot of those little monarchs. And so the children had a wonderful time releasing those butterflies. And this is Clara. She was all very excited. Now, outside of that, we also had a monarch in the annual house. And I just took a few pictures of that. But I thought I was so fascinated because that is you could see the wings through it already. And then it came out and just hung next to the old nesting area, and then opened up, dried out, and flew away. Okay, so my granddaughter with her three little ones decided to do it was actually a little butterfly house that she ordered at that time, I think from National Geographic, but I'm not really sure about that. But let's come, and this is what she's releasing. Then shortly after that, we got in some of these too. And I think it's exactly the same thing. So there's a few of these downstairs. It's called a giant butterfly garden. But I want to tell you, she's got these three children, 5, soon to be 4 tomorrow, as a matter of fact, and a year and a half. And they love the entire process. And all of their little butterflies came to be, lived through, and they released them on their back deck. So that was a fun kind of thing. Now let's review a little bit more here of some of the things I told you about the lantana. But I want to tell you a little bit about taking care of some of these plants too. This one is in a hanging basket, and there's so many bicolors now, lots of different colors and tones. When you go home with this, and most of you probably already know this, but a lot of our customers don't. With containers, with hanging baskets, you are constantly watering these, particularly when it gets warmer. And when you water, be sure that you don't let it dry out so much that the water will run down the edges and out the holes, and you think you've watered it and you really haven't. So a good way to test a basket is to lift it up, okay? And if it's heavy, you know it's still wet. But what is really important is the fertilization, because you're washing nutrients out of this all the time. And the easiest thing to use is this Jack's Bloom Booster. Follow the directions and fertilize either half strength every week, or you can do full strength every 2 weeks. And really, these things thrive. Unless you do that, they won't go all summer and be beautiful. And you do have to deadhead every now and then to keep them going. So you really want to have success with these things. And another plant that we don't have a lot of, that's really interesting, this one just came in, and I loved it because I know that it blooms all summer. And this actually became a perennial for me, and it's a proven winner, and it's called Suncredible, but it is a helianthus, and the helianthus is a perennial, okay? And this for me, when I put it in 2 years ago, actually became a perennial for me, okay? There is one more over here that I really do want to talk about also, because this is something that we haven't had a lot of until recently, and it will take full sun or part shade. And it'll take a lot of shade actually. And I don't know if you can see that really interesting blossom there. Okay. But it is spigelia. Spigelia. And this is about its height. And the clump will continue to get bigger, and it will run slightly, but nothing obnoxious at all. This is just a great, can you take that, Kelly? Thank you, honey. And then there's a couple of others that I do want to mention, that this again is in the perennial section, and they're both varieties of, this one is really called Mexican hat. It's ratabita, okay? And I don't think you can maybe see the, yes, you can. See the flower, it's very unusual. And again, a seed head. It's not just pollination. Yes, that's great. There's a number of these out there. Again, Salvia is a big group, a really big group of plants. And there's a display that contains several colors of this type of salvia. They are perennial, they are long blooming. Again, deadheading periodically to keep that thing in the ground. I like to recommend when you're planting a fertilizer. I use Plantone. I love organic in the ground. I don't mind using the um, the bloom booster in plant in containers, and it's so easy, okay, to do that. But when I'm planting in the ground, I like to add some beneficial soils to what I've got. And I know that bumper crop is a good one. I thought I had brought up others, and I don't think I did. But this is a good one to put in. Another one is oyster compost, that to put a couple of shovels full in an area where you're planting, but always to use an organic product that's slow release and is really good for the plants. It doesn't push them too hard, okay? Plant tone, garden tone is good and wonderful. I'm glad I showed that master gardener bumper crop, because this particular one has oyster compost in it also, and it's an absolute favorite of David Yost, which you probably are familiar with David also, because he and I used to do the show together. So, as far as planting is concerned, when in the ground, I love to put the organic fertilizer, and otherwise, and I put it in all my containers too. But I do the additional this. Now, as far as the herbs are concerned, I don't use this because it's not organic. And my herbs, I usually just sprinkle in, and they don't like to be heavily fertilized anyway. And so I just use an additional Plantone every now and then, just gently working it into the container. But that's pretty much what it takes to have success with these plants. Do want to share with you three other pictures that are kind of special to me. As I've talked to you about sharing your gardening knowledge and getting the kids, the young, out into the garden. Well, I've been gardening with Clara now as soon as she could walk, I think, and she's 5.5. And little Lydia is going to be 4 tomorrow, and she's really picked up on it. But we were gardening last weekend, and little Elias joined us. So he's walking pretty well now, and he insisted on having his own shovel and his own bucket. And I provided an area where it was quite safe for him to do all the shoveling that he wanted to. So it's really, really nice to share. And in that same day, I took this picture of the two little girls. Really a neighbor, fun neighbor, made 2 or 3 of these little raised beds, primarily for the little girls. And they plant things in it periodically. We were planting a few of the older onion sets that I had left over at the edges, and then they planted lettuce in the center part of this. Yes, you can seed lettuce in now in part shade. Wouldn't be really happy in full hot sun, but you can have great success um, in part shade. And so they planted some lettuce because they love to eat lettuce. And when you work with these children, young children or even older ones, don't give them the task of weeding all day. They'll never love the garden if you do that. But give them something they can succeed with. I think that's very, very important. And the last picture of the day is Bambi. Okay. I do not have a love affair with Bambi. I live in an area that I have been in for 65 plus years. And there was no Bambi around for many, many years, and now I have a lot. And so I have a lot of problems with some of my favorite plants. Let's go back. So what do I do about it? I use repellents, okay? And the primary repellent that I use is Bobex, and I've used it for years. It doesn't wash off with a light rain. In a really heavy rain, I might do it again. But generally speaking, it lasts at in the springtime for a couple of weeks. Now, why is it different in the spring? Because you're constantly getting new growth. All of these things are coming out and they're fresh and they're lush and they're putting on their flowers. And sometimes they like the foliage, sometimes they like just the flowers. Hosta is a favorite, and it's also a favorite of mine. And I have a lot of shade, so hosta worked for me. But I have to spray it. And now I'm spraying it every 2 weeks because it's growing. After that, when we get into the summer, it'll often go a month without worrying about spraying. Some people use milorganite around these plants. Bobex is not. It's smelly, okay? You spray it, you want to get a shower afterwards. But it only lasts for like 24 hours, and then you don't smell it. Milorganite lasts a lot longer than that. Now, some people like to alternate, so we carry other repellent products too. Liquid Fence is one of them. I Must Garden is another, and you can alternate with them. I haven't been alternating, and I wouldn't really know which one was working. I don't think if I did, because you're doing both. But if you use one and they begin to munch, then it is time to shift to another one. Okay. So that is primarily what I do to try. And if I miss a plant, they find it. I don't really understand why, but they do. So that's about the wrap up for the day. Sally, if you're there.
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay. How about
I made it through. Alrighty, time to get to some questions. So anybody who has questions, please feel free to submit them now. We already have some that have come in. Just a quick reminder for anybody who joined late. We are recording the class today, and if we don't get to your questions today, you are always welcome to follow up with us.
and you will be sending out the plant list, right?
Yes, I'll be doing that tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay. So our first question is about your container perennials. The question is, how do you winterize those plants if you have a lot of them? Is there anything that you do to keep them safe during the winter?
Okay, as far as perennials are concerned, number one, you want to be sure that your container is reasonably frost hardy. And generally speaking, if they're well fired, they are. You don't ever want to leave a container with a saucer underneath it because that will freeze and crack it if it gets water in it. And the other thing you don't want is to have it sitting directly on the ground. You don't want that anyway, okay? Because little worms can stop up the drainage and other problems can happen. Or it might not drain well at all. So let's assume that your container is winter hardy. I overwinter a lot, but my containers are, most of them, a minimum of 12 inches, and most are 18 inches. I have some larger than that, but let's say it's 18 inches. I have hosta. I've got a couple of salvia in there. I don't use a lot of perennials in my containers. I usually either put one in that lends nice foliage. I love to use carex in it, a grass-like thing, or Hakanakloa, which is another beautiful grass. And I use hosta, or I use a lung blooming like the salvia in a container. Okay. And they all winter well outside. I haven't lost any of them in a container. If there is a concern, now you can't winter a shrub like boxwood or that sort of thing by putting it into the garage, but some people do that. But generally speaking, if the container is reasonably large, I don't have any trouble overwintering it. If you're not sure, you can pull it up next to the house, somewhere that's protected. Okay.
Okay. Um, all right, next question about the spirea that is to your left.
Yeah.
Do you know about how big it can get or its height or spread?
Yes, I have one that's similar to this, a little slightly different. This one happens to be called Magic Carpet. Mine is candy corn. Mine are candy corn. Very, very similar. And it's 3 feet tall and as wide and absolutely striking. I just can't compliment that plant enough. Now, if you want to control its height or keep it under that a little bit, after it finishes blooming, you can cut it back by a third. And that doesn't mean shear it, okay? I love to cut so it's flows rather than being a little round ball. But if you want a little round ball, that's okay too. But you can control the height of it somewhat by cutting it back every year immediately after it flowers. Okay.
Okay. Next question. I have an area that only gets afternoon sun about 3 hours. Okay, so about 3 hours of sun, but in the afternoon. What would you recommend for that space, either annual or perennial?
Well, now that's a long answer, okay? But if it doesn't have total afternoon baking sun, you can grow anything probably well that enjoys some shade because that's not enough sun to bake it, I don't think, just 3 hours. If it's totally hot all afternoon, that's another story. And some of these, for instance, the spirea, I would try that because I think you'd get pretty good results. It'd be a little thinner, might not be as thick as it would if it were in more sun. I would try that. And some of these things are more tolerant. I know the bee balm is. I know that spigelia that I showed you is, that you could do that. It's amazing what I do grow where I have a similar situation. So sometimes you just need to try it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
how you learn. Yeah.
All right. Okay, we have more questions coming in. Let's see. Next question. Um, how do you keep rabbits from eating cone flowers? Or we can just probably say, what are your general recommendations for keeping rabbits away?
Oh, if I were you, I'd encourage a fox.
Yeah, how to do it.
I have a beautiful fox. I think I've got 2 fox right now. So there may be some babies running around out there. And I do love the fox because they take care of a lot of things. Okay. There are some rabbit repellents, and it's very annoying because you have to continually apply them. But I know that Bobex makes a rabbit repellent, and I don't know whether Amos Garden does. I'm pretty sure they do, so check that section down there.
Okay.
And the only other thing is to get some netting. I'm sure you've all seen where you can put some low netting around things to help ward off the rabbits or whatever, but that is a little annoying. I do go to that every now and then when I want to totally protect something from the deer. I put a little deer fencing up. In fact, my whole vegetable garden is surrounded by deer fencing. So, no, rabbits are annoying. Yep.
All right. Um, let's see. Okay. This may be a question for the plant clinic, but you might be able to address some general information about cone flowers that will help. This person asked, my cone flowers keep dying. What am I doing wrong? Too much water, not enough sun. Do they have any particular needs as far as water goes or sunlight that might cause a common issue?
Well, generally speaking, coneflowers, echinacea, are extremely hardy. And I have not had any issues at all with those. And I don't work the plant clinic. And I always teasingly said to David Yost when we were working together on the show, I'll take care of beauty, you take care of the beast. And so he did, because he sees these, they see, he's not the only one that sees these problems coming in. I don't. Generally speaking, a lot of the perennials, unless you know that it likes wet feet, don't like wet feet. And a lot of people aren't aware of how wet it may be in the winter time. Sometimes that's when we lose plants, is if water sits for any period of time when the plants are dormant in the winter. So I would suspect more that it was perhaps too much water rather than not enough. Because once they are established, they will tolerate, okay, some drought or some dry periods. It's better to water deeply when you do water. That doesn't mean go out with a watering can or lightly sprinkle over. It takes time. When it's really dry, it takes time to water so that that water goes down to the roots. Because if you water in a shallow fashion, the roots will turn up to go to the water, and then it's not good, because now the roots are going up. You want the roots to go down. And so when it is dry, water deeply and don't water often. But watch how you do water. Now, the other thing is that people don't realize that they sometimes kill a lot of plants with sprinkler systems too, if it overlaps an area and keeps it too wet. So think about that. I don't know if you have a sprinkler system. And I had a neighbor who desperately wanted a dogwood in the middle of her front yard. And when she got to the third one, I said, you know, uh, do you remember perhaps that I suggested with your sprinkler system that it's keeping that root ball too wet? Now, that dogwood would have tolerated that if it had been established and those roots were out there, but it hadn't. And it didn't like that continual watering in a root ball where the roots had not yet gone out into the soil. And so those are the things that you need to think about, you know. Is it too much water, or am I watering too often? So watering it may be the problem.
All righty. All right, next question. Do you know, and I think the answer to this is no, but if you are trying to keep dogs out of your plants, which we actually used to have an issue with our family dog trampling some of our plants. I'm not sure if this is the exact same thing, but they wanted to know if Bob-X or liquid fence would work on a dog. I said probably not, because that's a, yeah, okay.
I don't know of anything that would work to repel a dog, you know.
Yeah.
You know, when you have these wonderful pets and so forth, you can't always have both. You know?
Pat Riley, this actually just reminded me, but she, in her deer resistant gardening presentation, one of her recommendations, if you have a pretty bad deer problem, is to get a dog, which is valid. Anyways, yeah, so that's what I was saying. I think since those are designed to repel, like a deer, it's like a prey animal, whereas a dog's not going to care about the same, thing.
Yeah.
So,
Some
okay.
dogs are are not so bad about digging. Some dig too, you know. Um, you just have to figure out how you're going to deal with that, you know.
I know. Every dog is different too.
Yeah.
All righty, next question. Can you grow and winter over Blue Star Amsonia in a container?
If that container's large enough, I don't know why you couldn't, because
Okay.
they're very hardy. And I love the blue star. It's beautiful. My absolute favorite is hubrecti. It has a narrower leaf, and and they have a nice flower at this time of the year, usually a soft blue, very attractive. But they have lovely foliage all summer long. So it's a contrasting foliage. But their big claim to fame is the brilliant orangey color that they turn in the fall and remains so for several weeks. So, and they're all nice, but Recti is my favorite. And
Okay, okay.
Recti.
Alrighty, next question. All right, we got a few more minutes, so we'll do a few more. Oh, I love this one. Are there any blue perennials native to our area?
Oh,
Such a hard color to find.
well, we just named one, Amsonia. Okay.
Okay.
And it's blue. Okay. And I would have to look up some of these, okay, to see just which one might be blue. But Amsonia comes to mind, and it's definitely an updated. Okay,
All right.
looking around at some of these, there's Monarda, but you'd be stretching it if you called it blue. I think it might be more purple. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, our next question is, do you have a handout on recommended fertilizers? Which, if you're talking, okay, so if you're talking about the fertilizers from this class, I'll include them in the handout that we send out tomorrow. If you're talking about fertilizers generally, I will have to ask, unless you know.
Well,
Like,
I don't think you could answer that in
yeah, it's highly dependent on the situation.
because everything is slightly different, okay?
Okay.
There are some people that if they have azaleas or acid-loving plants, blueberries, for instance, that like to use maybe holly tone because a lot of these plants don't need heavy fertilization. And if you want to use an organic, particularly, you would choose if you've got azaleas in the prime time to fertilize azaleas is immediately after they bloom, which is now, and putting down that, and it's an acidic fertilizer that's all organic. So that's one type of fertilizer. I'm talking to you about Plantone, which is very similar to Garden Tone, which I love to use in my vegetable garden because it's organic. Um, as far as some of these other things are concerned, they don't really require heavy fertilization on planting. I use the Plantone if necessary once a year. If you want to do that, I'm a big one on using compost too. And if you
Okay.
have room for a compost pile and you need to enrich your soil, I now like to for the worms to do that work. And I love leaf grow or leaf. It's a compost. It's been composted, and you can even put that down an inch or inch and a half. You can top dress it if you choose with a mulch. I don't worry about that. I like the looks of the additive, and then the worms take that down and improve your soil, and it's all good. Okay, so leaf grow is a type of compost. I have my own compost pile, but I've got the space for it, and I have a lot of leaves, and I don't turn it frequently, but if I mix the straw for aeration, and I put in the grass clippings, and if I turn it 2 or 3 times during the year, it's ready to use by the fall. So I don't do a lot of fertilizing. Yes, I do for the right things, but you can't, there's no cut and dried way to say this is the fertilizer to use.
Okay. All right, we have two more questions, three, but two of them are the same topic. So the first one is Cosmos, is that a deer? Have you had issues with deer eating that plant?
I haven't had the deer eat that plant.
Okay.
I'm not going to tell you that they won't because as soon as I do that, they will.
They will, yeah. That definitely happens, but not something that you've personally seen. So,
No.
um, okay. Our last question is one that I know you talk about sometimes in your containers class. Do you have any advice for keeping squirrels out of pots? One of these questions is just keeping them out of pots generally. The other one is about pots with vegetables.
Okay, I really have used for many years, small stones. I
Mhm.
like to hold the soil when I'm potting it up. I like to hold the soil at least an inch down from the top of that container. Number one, that makes it much easier to water. Okay, if you fill it all the way to the top, the water runs off the sides and you're wasting water and not watering the plant well. So hold it down an inch from the top of the container. And then have used 3/8 inch stones, half an inch in the top of that. Anytime you have bare soil, the squirrels love to dig in it. Okay. And that discourages them. It really does. And chipmunks too, because I've got chipmunks also. I have lately, because I've got so many containers, and the soil, the stone is hard for me to do. I still prefer the stone, but lately I have been using pine straw because it's very easy. It's very lightweight for me, and it's attractive, and it may not be attractive for you. It's kind of nostalgic for me because I'm from the deep south in the pine woods. But I put a lot of that around in the container. Now that does the stones, something like that. You can use mulch. I don't often do that, okay? But the stones are my favorite. That's the easiest and the best. Now when you're watering, it doesn't splash out. It's easy. And so far it has repelled the squirrels for me. Okay. And if
Alrighty.
it's found outside, mulching well should keep the squirrels from digging as much.
We
Okay.
have someone on this class who just messaged me and said that they use pine cones, which is pretty smart.
Yeah, yeah, pine cones can be used for a lot of things. You just,
Oh goodness. All right. Well, that's all of our questions. Thank you. We're getting some messages coming in. Peg, I'm gonna just give a couple quick notes and then I'll let you wrap up. Just so you all know, we did get a question about this. We are going to be taking a little bit of a break for the summer. I'm working on getting some webinars scheduled, hopefully in July. We're just trying to get our schedules lined up, finalize some topics, but it will be not as intense of a schedule as we have, say, in the spring or the fall. So just so you all know, this is really one of our last webinars, maybe until July. We're still working on that, TBD. So keep watching your emails. I will be sending out an email tomorrow with the plant list. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And I think that's about it for me. That's everything that I needed to share. So Peg, do you want to wrap up before we close?
well, I just hope that perhaps I've introduced you to at least a plant or two that you may not have used before, because I've only skimmed the surface of plants that are beneficial, and I just brought my favorites. So that's what you're seeing today. There are a lot more out there, okay? So come and visit us and we'll be happy to show you where they are. Thank
Definitely. All
you.
right. Well, thank you
Awesome.
so much, everybody. Thank you for attending. And Peg, thank you as always for teaching. And I will see you all later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.